I remember the exact moment my world split in half. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early September 5 years ago, and I was sprawled out on my living room couch in my modest one-bedroom apartment in Nashville. I was staring at my phone, half expecting a text from Haley, my girlfriend of 3 years. She was supposed to meet me for a late lunch, and she was never the type to flake without at least sending me a message. But that day, she never showed. I didn't think much of it at first. She was a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, and her schedule could get hectic. Maybe an emergency at work. Maybe she'd forgotten her phone in her locker. But that sinking sensation in my stomach told me something was off. Normally, I'd brush aside that kind of anxiety, chalking it up to my own insecurities. But that afternoon, I couldn't ignore the rising wave of dread. It started simply enough. I tried calling her, but it went straight to voicemail. Then I tried texting her. The message delivered, but there was no reply. Hours ticked by, and that dreaded feeling of being in limbo swelled inside me, gnawing at my insides like a parasite. I started pacing around the apartment, rearranging the furniture in my head, trying to distract myself. I'd glance out the window, hoping to see her car in the parking lot. Nothing. The night came, and with it, a relentless tension that made my heart pound. At around midnight, I drove to the hospital, telling myself that if she was there, maybe I'd spot her on a break. Maybe I'd get some sense of reassurance just standing outside, feeling close to her. But the hospital was quiet, the fluorescent lights humming in the stillness. I asked the receptionist if Haley was still on duty, but she frowned at me in confusion. Haley wasn't scheduled to work that day. In fact, the hospital staff mentioned they'd not seen her for 2 days, which was odd given her usual routine. Something in my brain clicked. A wave of panic seized me. I tried calling her again, repeatedly, but only that cold, automated voice greeted me. Worry turned to desperation. I called her best friend, Lindsay, who I barely knew but had in my phone from a surprise party Haley had once thrown for me. Lindsay didn't pick up, so I left a voicemail, my voice trembling as I tried to keep calm. I drove back home on autopilot, mechanical in my movements. I remember parking crookedly in front of our building and stumbling upstairs, feeling like I was trapped in a bad dream. The next day, I took off from work, claiming a family emergency. I felt hollow, like I was floating through my own life. My boss at the construction firm, Carl, was understanding enough, told me to take as much time as I needed, that mental health was important, but I'd never felt so mentally unhinged in my life. For days, I tried to find any clue as to where Haley might have gone. I questioned her colleagues, her family, even her ex-college roommates. It was as though she had vanished without a trace. No one had heard from her. No one knew anything about her sudden disappearance. My mind was a cyclone of worst-case scenarios. Could she have been in an accident? Could she have been kidnapped? I swung from panic to anger in seconds. Maybe she'd just left me, run away without so much as a goodbye. But that thought seemed insane. She wasn't like that. We loved each other, we shared so much, or so I thought. Then, about a week into her disappearance, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. My throat felt tight as I answered. On the other end was a man whose voice I didn't know. He introduced himself as Travis, a friend of Haley's. He sounded hesitant, as if he were wrestling with whether to speak to me at all. He told me that Haley was safe, but that I shouldn't go looking for her. Then he hung up, leaving me with about 1,000,000 questions flooding my mind. I tried calling that number back. No luck. I had no clue who Travis was or why Haley would have confided in him about me. I sank onto my living room carpet and just stared at the phone, the beeping tone of the ended call ringing in my ears. As the days turned into weeks, I found out from Haley's landlord that she had abruptly ended her lease. Her furniture was gone. Her phone contract was canceled. She'd disappeared from her bank, closing her accounts entirely. She'd planned this. She left me. It was a realization that hit me like a freight train. I spent the next year in a perpetual haze. I'd wake up every morning with a pit in my stomach. I felt like the world had turned gray, like every color had been sucked out and replaced with a dull sense of grief. I lost weight. My mother grew worried, urging me to seek therapy. I tried, but the therapist only reminded me how fragile my mental state was, how I was clinging to a ghost I didn't understand. I tried focusing on work, but even that felt pointless. I'd spend late nights on social media searching for any sign of Haley's existence. She had no Facebook, no Instagram, no online footprint that I could trace. I felt like a detective without clues. Then came the day I accidentally discovered she'd been having an affair. It was a Sunday morning, and I was cleaning out the closet in our old bedroom, preparing to move because I couldn't afford the rent on my own anymore. I found an old shoebox stuffed with Polaroids, ticket stubs, notes. I recognized some from our dates, from a trip to Florida we'd once taken. But in the middle of it all, there was a photograph of Haley with her arms around a guy I'd never met. The date scrawled on the back was 4 months before she left. She was smiling at him in a way I'd never seen before, a light in her eyes that felt foreign to me. I began digging deeper, searching for any shred of evidence in our old texts, her emails, phone logs. Bits and pieces came together like a twisted puzzle. She'd been seeing someone for months. The day she disappeared, the day I waited on that couch, she had probably been with him. The betrayal burned, igniting a rage I'd never known I had. All this time, I'd been worried sick while she'd planned her getaway with another man. For a long time, I couldn't process it. I felt humiliated, like my heart had been dragged through mud. The realization stung, but it also fueled something in me. I was angry, sure, but I also needed closure. I couldn't live in that limbo of not knowing why, of never having the chance to look her in the eye and ask her why she did this. Why had she wasted years of my life if she wanted someone else all along? Did our love ever mean anything to her? These questions tormented me day in and day out. Eventually, I did the only thing that felt right. I decided to find her. Or at least I decided to attempt it. At first, it was just online searching. I'd scour old phone bills, sometimes paying a small fortune to track down a lead, only to hit a dead end. I hired a private investigator, a man named Mark, who'd been recommended by a friend of a friend. Mark seemed confident at first until he realized how thoroughly Haley had erased herself from her previous life. He found only scattered hints. An out-of-state P.O. box, a rumored new phone line under a possible alias. Nothing concrete. Money was tight, so I had to give up Mark's services after 2 months, and I was back to square one, but with a newfound obsession burning inside me. I moved back in with my parents in a small town outside of Memphis to save money. It was humiliating at first, being a grown man in his 30s, sleeping in his childhood bedroom plastered with posters of old rock bands. But I swallowed my pride. I knew that if I wanted any hope of finding her, I needed financial stability. I worked long hours, sometimes side jobs, anything to scrape together the cash I'd need for traveling or paying for record searches. My friends thought I was losing it, and maybe I was. Maybe from the outside, I looked like a fool chasing a woman who'd shattered my heart, but the betrayal had lit a fire in me that refused to die. Those days were bleak. I'd labor from dawn until dusk and then sit in my room at night, scanning the internet or making phone calls to old acquaintances. I found a phone number that might have belonged to the man in that photo, but it was disconnected. I tracked down a friend of his, only to be stonewalled when I asked about Haley. People treat you like you're crazy when you start calling them out of the blue, asking about someone who clearly doesn't want to be found. I felt like I was looking for a ghost, and sometimes I believed she might as well be one. Yet, amid my anger, I still missed her. I missed the way she'd leave me silly notes on the refrigerator, the way she'd run her fingers through my hair when I was tired, the way she'd laugh at the dumbest jokes I made. I missed the feeling of having a partner, someone to come home to. It tore me up inside to reconcile those memories with the deceit she'd orchestrated. It was like missing a fictional character who'd never truly existed. About 1.5 years after she disappeared, I made my first breakthrough. I'd taken a trip to Atlanta, following a rumor that someone matching Haley's description was working at a downtown hospital under a new name. I visited that hospital, feigning a family emergency, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. My heart hammered in my chest every time I saw a nurse pass by. Eventually, I grew bold enough to show a few staff members a picture of Haley, at not telling them I suspected her of anything, just saying she was an old friend and I was trying to reconnect. One nurse recognized her face but couldn't recall a name. She swore she'd seen her in the cafeteria once or twice, but she wasn't sure. She suggested I check the staff directory. I spent the next day rummaging through every piece of public info I could access: tax records, hospital rosters, anything. But the nurse I'd shown the photo to was off her shift, and none of the hospital records showed a name that matched Haley's or any variation of it. I left Atlanta feeling both a jolt of hope and a stab of disappointment. She might be here, or she might have been. That was the toughest part, always being so close, yet still so far away. Time passed in a surreal blur. My search turned into an obsession that consumed everything. I lost friends, I stopped dating, I poured every spare cent into my pursuit of Haley. People told me to move on, find closure, let her go. They said she wasn't worth it, and maybe they were right. But I needed answers. I needed to look into her eyes and make sense of everything. Without that, I felt like I'd be stuck in this limbo forever. The strangest part was how my rage intertwined with my longing. I hated her, but I also needed her. I wanted to scream at her, to hold her, to demand an explanation, to cry on her shoulder. My emotions were a tangled mess I couldn't untie. Sometimes I'd go for long drives late at night, blasting old songs from when we first started dating, tears burning at the corners of my eyes. I felt pathetic, but I couldn't stop. I was a man possessed. 2 years in, Lindsay finally returned one of my calls. She sounded anxious, like she wasn't sure if she should be talking to me. She admitted that she'd known about Haley's affair, at least partially. Haley had confided in her, saying she'd fallen out of love with me, that she was conflicted. Lindsay felt guilty but said Haley swore her to secrecy. Lindsay claimed she had no idea Haley would just vanish. She gave me one small nugget of information. The man's name was Ryan. She thought he was from Chicago. That was it. She didn't know Ryan's last name or much else, and she hadn't heard from Haley since she left. I didn't know if I believed Lindsay or not, but it was something. I clung to that name like a life raft. Ryan from Chicago. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't daydreamed about confronting Ryan, about punching him square in the jaw for wrecking my life. But he was just a stranger, and Haley had chosen him. My fight was never with him, not really. It was with her, and with the ghosts in my own mind. Still, I went to Chicago that summer. I used money I'd saved up from double shifts and side gigs. I haunted downtown bars and coffee shops, showing people photos, asking if they'd seen a couple that looked like Haley and the man in the Polaroid. I got a lot of strange looks. People either told me to move on or politely shrugged me off. I'd sleep in cheap motels on the outskirts of town, my stomach knotting every time I saw a blonde woman that vaguely resembled Haley. I was chasing a pipe dream. I knew it, but I couldn't stop. By year 3, the toll on my psyche was immense. My hair had started to show early streaks of gray. I felt older than my age, battered and worn down by an unrelenting need for closure. I tried therapy again, going weekly to a woman named Dr. Fletcher. She tried to help me separate the longing for answers from my sense of self-worth. She told me I might never find Haley, and I had to confront that reality. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but I kept looking anyway. Around that time, I wrote my first Reddit post about my experience. I found a subreddit dedicated to missing persons, where amateurs tried to solve cold cases. I poured my heart out, leaving out the more private details, but explaining how I'd been searching for my ex-girlfriend for almost 3 years. People were surprisingly supportive. Some offered advice on how to track digital footprints, how to contact certain agencies for help. Some scolded me, saying I should let it go. Others told me they'd had similar experiences and never found their exes. That Reddit post became my lifeline. I updated it every month or so, sharing any small breakthrough or new dead end. It felt cathartic to have an audience. People who, even if they thought I was crazy, at least gave me a moment of their time. Some nights, I'd read through the comments for hours, finding comfort in the fact that strangers cared enough to respond. In the 4th year, I finally found a potential trail leading to St. Louis. A Reddit user who followed my story said she'd seen someone who looked like Haley at a local diner. She'd recognized her from a photo I'd posted, though I used a fake name for Haley online. My heart nearly exploded with hope. I packed up my car that weekend and drove straight to St. Louis. For 2 weeks, I practically lived in that diner, chatting with the staff, showing them Haley's picture, asking if they'd seen a woman who matched her description. A few said she looked vaguely familiar, but they couldn't be certain. She might have passed through once, maybe twice. There was no sign of her now. I hunted all over the city, even paid a local private investigator for a few days. He found nothing substantial. Each night, I'd head back to a cheap motel room and stare at the ceiling, letting my thoughts churn like a storm. I felt closer than I'd ever been, but still empty-handed. I went home, dejected and exhausted. A part of me wanted to give up, but another part, the stubborn, angry part, refused to let go. My parents stopped asking for updates. My older sister, Teresa, moved on with her life, got married, had a child. I missed her wedding because I was off in St. Louis chasing a ghost. She didn't forgive me easily for that. My once close friend group dwindled to almost nobody. I had no time, no energy for normal life. My life was the search. And behind every road trip, every phone call, every late-night session on the internet, there was this inescapable ache in my chest. Why wasn't I good enough for her? Why did she leave without saying goodbye? Did she really think so little of me that I didn't even deserve an explanation? Finally, the 5th year rolled around. By this point, I'd become something of a legend on that missing persons subreddit. People recognized my username, would send me messages of encouragement or pity or scorn. I tried to maintain hope, but deep down, I felt the walls closing in. I was losing years of my life to a chase that might never end. I was losing pieces of myself in the process. My mother begged me to consider that maybe I wouldn't find her, and even if I did, maybe it wouldn't give me the closure I so desperately sought. Maybe I'd see that she was living happily with Ryan, or maybe they'd broken up and she'd found someone else. Where would that leave me anyway? One summer evening, as I was sitting alone in my cramped studio apartment, slightly better than my parents' house, but still a testament to my financial limitations, I got a direct message from a throwaway Reddit account. It said simply, "I know where she is." My hands shook as I read it. I felt my heart leap to my throat. I immediately replied, asking for more details, trying to verify if this was another hoax or a troll. The user responded hours later, telling me they wanted no part in some huge drama, but they couldn't stand watching me tear my life apart searching for Haley. They gave me a name, Ryan Coleman. They gave me an address in Seattle. They claimed Haley was living there with him. My skepticism warred with my hope. I'd been led astray so many times before, but I had to see it through. That night, I barely slept. I booked a flight to Seattle for the following weekend. The entire journey felt unreal. My body buzzed with a mixture of excitement, dread, fury, longing. I rehearsed 1,000 scenarios in my head. What if she slammed the door in my face? What if she denied everything? What if she wasn't even there? Or worse, what if she was but refused to acknowledge me? When I landed in Seattle, I rented a car and drove straight to the address. It was a small, unassuming house in a quiet neighborhood. I parked a little ways down the street, heart pounding so hard I thought I might faint. I waited until evening, watching the house from my car like some kind of detective in a low-budget movie. Then, I saw her. She stepped out onto the porch, laughing at something a man behind her said. My blood froze. It was Haley. She looked older, her hair a bit shorter, but it was her. I would have recognized her anywhere. My stomach twisted in knots. I watched as Ryan, tall, athletic, wearing a plain white t-shirt, joined her. They looked comfortable, domestic even. It felt like I was gazing through a window at a life that might have been mine if she hadn't betrayed me. They chatted for a moment, then she leaned into him, pressing a quick kiss to his cheek before heading back inside. I sat there, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, tears stinging my eyes. She was alive, happy, living a whole new life, while I'd spent half a decade unraveling. I fought the urge to march up to the door right then. I took a deep breath, mustered up whatever courage remained in me, and approached the house. My footsteps felt heavy, like I was wading through wet concrete. Each step echoed with 5 years of questions, rage, heartbreak. I knocked. My heart hammered in my chest. When the door swung open, I almost couldn't speak. Haley stood there, eyes wide as she recognized me. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Her face went pale. She looked like she'd seen a ghost, which, in a way, she had. Then she stammered out my name. Michael? I nodded. My throat was dry. I tried to say something, but the words stuck. I could see her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape. Ryan appeared behind her, confusion etched on his face. He asked who I was. Haley hesitated, then said, "An old friend." It stung that she wouldn't even say I was her ex, the man she'd vanished on. I felt my anger flare up, but I tried to keep it in check. I just asked if I could speak to her alone. Ryan bristled, but Haley asked him to give us a moment. He stepped back, watching us with a wary gaze. When the door closed behind us, we moved to the porch, and I confronted her. I told her about my years of searching, about how I'd discovered her affair, how I found that cryptic phone call from Travis, how I'd been chasing every clue. She said nothing at first, just stared at the porch floor. Finally, she exhaled a shaky breath and said, "I'm sorry." Her voice was soft, but her eyes were filled with guilt and something else, defiance maybe. She explained that she'd been unhappy, that she felt trapped, that she didn't know how to break it off with me without breaking me. She claimed she'd tried to tell me how she felt, but I'd never listened. I wanted to yell, to tell her that was a load of garbage, but a part of me wondered if she was right. Maybe I was so absorbed in our plans, in the life I thought we were building, that I never noticed her pulling away. She insisted she never meant to hurt me this badly, that she never expected I would chase her for years. She thought I'd move on, forget her. I asked her why she couldn't just say goodbye. She shook her head, her eyes brimming with tears. She said she was cowardly, she made a mistake, and by the time she realized how huge that mistake was, it was too late. She'd started a new life, and she didn't want to disrupt it. She was happy now. She claimed it wasn't even about me being a bad partner, it was about her own demons, her own fear of disappointing everyone. I was speechless, anger swirling in me like a hurricane. We talked for what felt like hours, though it might have only been minutes. Ryan stayed inside, probably listening through the window. I tried to keep my voice level, but sometimes it cracked with the weight of everything I'd been through. Haley cried, apologized, admitted she'd cheated on me for months before leaving. She said she ended up with Ryan, moved to Seattle, changed her phone, her job, everything. She wanted a fresh start. The closure I'd hoped for felt hollow. I wanted a reason that made sense, but all I got was her fear, her confusion, her own selfishness. And maybe that's the reality, that sometimes people hurt you not because they hate you, but because they're running from themselves. Still, it didn't erase the pain or the years I'd lost. I told her I deserved better. I told her she'd shattered my life. She agreed. She didn't argue. She just said she was sorry again. As I left, I realized that the conversation wasn't the triumphant moment I'd once pictured. There was no grand vindication, no dramatic reconciliation, no savage revenge. There was just sadness and regret. I walked away with tears in my eyes, feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because I finally had the truth. Heavier because that truth was so profoundly disappointing. When I got back to my motel that night, I stared at the ceiling until the sun came up. I felt numb. I didn't know how to process this new reality. My entire identity for the past 5 years had been wrapped up in searching for Haley, and now that I found her, I was faced with a life that I had to rebuild from scratch. I still hated her for what she did, but part of me also pitied her. She was human, flawed, terrified. It didn't justify her actions, but it made them less monstrous. The next day, I got on a flight back home. I didn't see Haley again. I haven't seen her since. I spent weeks in a fog, trying to figure out my next steps. That's when I decided to post my final update on Reddit. I wrote out the bare bones of what happened, not giving away her location or real name, but explaining that I'd found her and we talked. Then I went quiet. Some people in the comments were disappointed it wasn't more dramatic. Some were glad I found some closure. Others told me I'd wasted my time. Maybe I did. But as painful as it was, at least I got my answers. I could finally start to heal. I'm writing this now, almost a year after that encounter in Seattle. Healing hasn't been a straight path, but I'm slowly getting there. I've started dating again, gingerly, cautiously. My heart still bears the scars of Haley's betrayal, but those scars are part of me now. They remind me of what I survived. Sometimes I have nightmares. Sometimes I have flashbacks of that porch conversation, of her trembling voice saying she was sorry. But each day, it weighs on me a little less. If you're reading this, if you followed my story, or if you've stumbled upon it by chance, my advice is this. Know that closure may not come with fireworks or applause. It might just be two people standing on a porch, facing a painful reality. It might leave you feeling unsteady, even dissatisfied. But it's something, and something is better than the endless limbo of not knowing. If you choose to chase someone who left you, be sure you can handle the aftermath of finally catching them. Because closure doesn't always bring the peace we crave, but it can open the door to a new chapter. So that's my story. 5 years of searching, a world of heartbreak, and a final conversation under a dark Seattle sky. There's no grand redemption or perfect resolution. Life is messy, and people are complicated. But I'm learning to live with that. I'm learning to let go, to rebuild. This Reddit post is my way of saying goodbye to that chapter of my life, of putting it in the past where it belongs. Maybe sharing it will help someone else realize that sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that set us free. I remember the day Haley walked out of my life like a surreal painting. Now, I'm finally stepping out of that frame. In the aftermath of that final encounter with Haley, I found myself replaying every moment of our past with fresh eyes, as though searching for clues I'd missed. The nights we stayed up too late, laughing over shared inside jokes, the weekend getaways that felt like promises of a future we'd conquer together. The subtle shifts in her tone that I dismissed as work stress. It was all under a new lens now. Every memory tainted with the knowledge that even while we were making those memories, she was drifting away from me. It's a harsh truth to recognize that the person you loved had been slowly detaching herself long before she physically disappeared. For months after my return from Seattle, I wrestled with insomnia. My mind refused to quiet down. I'd stare at the shadows on my ceiling, tracing their shapes as though they might reveal some hidden wisdom about where my life was headed. My sister tried to help by inviting me over for dinner, involving me in family gatherings. She wanted to bridge the gap that had formed between us during my obsessive search. But I found social situations draining, each conversation feeling like an awkward dance where I pretended that everything was fine, when in reality, a swirling chaos churned inside me. That chaos was partly bitterness. I felt cheated out of years, out of a chance to form new connections, to advance in my career, to build a stable life for myself. My peers were settling down, buying homes, having children, while I was left picking through the rubble of my own heart. Yet, a part of me still clung to the love I once felt for Haley, a vestige of sentimentality that refused to die outright. It's a jarring experience, hating someone and missing them at the same time. Therapy became a weekly ritual. Dr. Fletcher guided me through the conflicting emotions, urging me to articulate the fantasies I'd held on to all those years. In my mind, I'd painted a scenario where, upon finding Haley, she'd break down in tears, apologize profusely, beg my forgiveness, and perhaps even confess she still loved me. It was a childish dream, an impossibility shaped by desperation. I had to face the stark reality. She had moved on. What I found in Seattle wasn't a tortured, regretful ex-lover waiting for me. It was a woman living her own version of happiness, worlds removed from mine. There were days when the enormity of it all pinned me to the couch. Simple tasks, doing the dishes, taking out the trash, felt Herculean. Guilt nagged at me, whispering that I'd wasted too much time, that I should have let go years ago. The regret stacked like bricks on my chest, but slowly I learned to breathe again. Each sunrise was a tiny beacon, reminding me that life was still marching forward, with or without my permission. I started journaling extensively. I wrote about the first time I met Haley in college, how she'd been volunteering at an animal shelter, and I'd tagged along with a friend. She was coaxing a skittish dog into her arms, her face lit by a compassion so radiant I couldn't help but be drawn to her. I wrote about our first date at a small cafe by the river, how she teased me for ordering the sweetest drink on the menu. I wrote about the night I proposed moving in together, and how her eyes flickered with excitement and hesitation, a sign I only now recognize as uncertainty. Putting these memories on paper felt like an exorcism of sorts. Each story I told was like gently placing a relic of our past into a box labeled done. I couldn't rewrite history, but I could interpret it differently, glean lessons about myself and about love. Perhaps I'd been too willing to ignore red flags. Perhaps I'd romanticized our relationship, making her into an ideal partner instead of seeing her as a flawed human being. Perhaps, in my quest to be the perfect boyfriend, I smothered her and missed her signals of discontent. These reflections didn't absolve her of her betrayal, but they helped me recognize my own complicity in our dysfunctional dynamic. One of the hardest things I had to learn was how to let go of my anger. Hatred, I discovered, is a formidable chain. It keeps you tethered to the very person you want to escape. Every time I indulged in thoughts of revenge or bitterness, I was handing Haley more space in my head, more power over my emotions. Dr. Fletcher often reminded me that forgiveness isn't about absolving the other person, it's about freeing yourself. That concept was alien to me at first. How could I forgive the woman who'd orchestrated such a painful exit, leaving me to pick up the pieces? But as the days turned into weeks and the weeks turned into months, I realized that staying angry was a poison, and I was the one drinking it. So I worked on letting go, not for her sake, but for mine. I wrote letters I never sent, detailing exactly how she made me feel, how her betrayal shattered the sense of safety I once had in love. I burned those letters in a small metal bucket in my backyard, watching the ashes float away on the wind. It wasn't some magical cure, but it was cathartic, a symbolic release of the darkness I'd been carrying. I started reconnecting with old friends, people who used to invite me out for drinks or poker nights but had stopped after countless rejections. I explained my situation in broad strokes, leaving out the more obsessive details. Some friendships were beyond salvage, but others rekindled, albeit cautiously. It felt odd to step back into the world of casual social gatherings, office parties, happy hours, weekend barbecues. I was learning to talk about things other than my heartbreak, to focus on the present moment instead of the past. My career also demanded attention. I drifted aimlessly through jobs over the years, lacking the stability or concentration to climb any corporate ladder. But after my Seattle trip, something in me awakened. I couldn't remain stuck forever. I applied for a management position at a construction company in downtown Memphis, leveraging my past experience and the unwavering support of my boss Carl, who still believed I had potential. To my surprise, I got the job. Suddenly, I had a reason to wake up in the mornings, a sense of purpose outside my personal turmoil. Yet, amid the slow progress, I still found myself haunted by dreams. In them, I was always chasing Haley through familiar places, our old apartment, the campus where we'd met, but she was always just out of reach. I'd call her name, my voice echoing in endless hallways. She'd glance over her shoulder, sorrow in her eyes, and vanish. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding. It was a reminder that healing isn't linear, that even as the days passed, the scars of 5 years couldn't be erased overnight. Social media became another battlefield for my emotions. Even though she'd erased her old profiles, I'd sometimes be tempted to look up her new life in Seattle, if she had one online. I never found anything. Her digital presence remained minimal. I don't know if she decided to stay off social platforms to avoid me, or because she genuinely wasn't interested. Either way, the mystery lingered, a small corner of my mind always itching with the desire to check. But I resisted. It was time to stop torturing myself. Occasionally, I'd log back into that missing person subreddit, lurking on new posts about people searching for loved ones. Some stories ended in reunions, others in tragedy, and many in silence. People tagged me, asking for updates, but I mostly stayed quiet. I realized I no longer needed that space as my emotional crutch. My story had run its course, and while I had once thrived on the attention and empathy, I now wanted to focus on my real life rather than digital echoes of sympathy. As the months rolled into a year past Seattle, I started dating casually. It was terrifying. I worried about trusting anyone. I worried about being too broken to form a healthy bond. My first few dates were awkward at best, disastrous at worst. I'd catch myself comparing these new women to Haley, a habit that filled me with guilt and sadness. But with each step forward, I got a little better at being present, a little more willing to see people for who they were instead of what I'd lost. Eventually, I met Nicole. She worked in marketing, had a sharp wit, and a knack for spotting when I was overthinking. Our first date was at a taco truck near downtown. an unpretentious spot that allowed us to talk freely without the pressures of a fancy restaurant. I remember the moment she made me laugh so hard I nearly choked on my food. It was a laugh I hadn't felt in years, a genuine, carefree burst that momentarily lifted the weight off my shoulders. Afterward, I sat in my car, feeling an odd mixture of hope and fear. Could I let myself be happy again? Could I risk vulnerability after everything that happened? Nicole and I took it slow. I told her about Haley eventually, but not all the gritty details. Just enough for her to understand why I sometimes flinched at certain topics, why trust was such a delicate concept for me. She listened, asked questions, but never pried. She didn't judge me for my past. Instead, she encouraged me to keep moving forward, one step at a time. One evening after we'd been seeing each other for about 3 months, Nicole confessed she had her own share of heartbreak in her past. She understood the complexity of healing, the lingering shadows that follow you even when you try to outrun them. In that moment, I felt a gentle camaraderie, a shared vulnerability that allowed us to connect deeper. It wasn't the dizzy, all-encompassing excitement I'd once felt with Haley in the early days. This was quieter, steadier, built on mutual respect rather than starry-eyed infatuation. Despite the progress, there were moments I'd question everything. I'd think about flying back to Seattle, knocking on Haley's door one more time, demanding a more satisfying explanation. But each time, I reminded myself that I'd already gotten everything she could give. Her version of the truth, her apology, her confession of unhappiness. There was no magical phrase that could mend the gaps in my life that her betrayal had left. Only I could do that. Over time, the bitterness dulled to a faint ache, like an old injury that flares up when the weather changes. Certain triggers would still catch me off guard. A song we used to dance to, a commercial for the hospital where she once worked, a random mention of Seattle. I'd feel that familiar pang in my chest, but I learned to breathe through it, to ground myself in the present, to remember that I'm not the same man who drove himself to despair chasing a ghost. Social gatherings no longer filled me with dread. I could hold a conversation without my thoughts straying to the perpetual question of where Haley might be. I rebuilt my friendships one at a time, explaining my past when necessary, apologizing for the years I'd spent consumed by my hunt. Some friends were gracious and happy to reconnect. Others had moved on without me. I couldn't blame them. Life doesn't wait while you chase old shadows. Looking at my life now, I see how far I've come from that frantic young man who jumped in his car on a desperate late-night drive to the hospital, or who spent hour after hour scouring the internet for clues. I see how heartbreak can either destroy you or forge you into someone resilient. I see that love is not a guarantee of forever, but rather a partnership where two people must continuously choose each other, even when it's hard, even when fear and doubt creep in. Haley didn't choose me in the end, and that's a reality I've learned to live with. But I'm choosing myself now, choosing to believe that I deserve a future that isn't defined by her departure. If someone reading these words is going through something similar, if you've been left behind without answers, if you're consumed by the need to find closure, know that it's okay to search, but also know the toll it can take. Ask yourself what you're really looking for. Is it revenge, validation, understanding, or simply the ability to say you tried everything you could? Be mindful of how much of your life you're willing to put on hold. And remember, closure sometimes arrives in a messy, anticlimactic form. The real closure might come from accepting you won't get the perfect resolution and learning to be okay with that anyway. As for me, I'm learning that life can be beautiful again. It's not the same brand of beauty I once imagined. It's quieter, more subdued, built on small victories, like cooking dinner with Nicole without thinking of Haley, or celebrating a promotion at work without the shadow of old regrets. It's in the simple joys of waking up next to someone who genuinely wants to share a new day with me, who doesn't harbor secrets or plan an escape under my nose. It's in the friendships I've rekindled, the family ties I'm mending. It's in the knowledge that love can hurt, but it can also heal, and that sometimes the biggest betrayals can pave the way for our most profound growth. So here I am, writing the final word of this chapter that started 5 years ago. I'll always carry the memories of Haley, the good and the bad, but they no longer govern my every breath. I'm free, or at least freer than I've been in a long time. And maybe that's what matters most, that in facing the worst heartbreak of my life, I discovered a strength and capacity for renewal I never knew I had. That's a gift I won't squander. I hope anyone who reads this finds their own path to that same realization. We're all stronger than we think. And in time, the wounds that feel fatal can become the scars that remind us we survived. Even as I write these closing thoughts, I realize how extraordinary it is that a single betrayal can stretch so far across your life, influencing your choices, your worldview, your sense of self. There were days when I felt like my entire identity was bound to the pain Haley caused me, as though I was nothing but the echoes of that heartbreak. But time has a way of eroding even the sharpest edges, revealing new terrains beneath the rubble. Sometimes in the quiet moments when I reflect on my journey, I'm struck by the realization that I am more than that wound. I am the person who chose to face it, who learned from it, and who lived to tell the tale. In the year following my return from Seattle, I tried to piece together the fragments of my old dreams. I'd once envisioned a life of simple contentment. A stable job, a loving partner, maybe a small family if the stars aligned. When Haley vanished, those dreams became stale and broken, like a painting left out in the rain. Now, with Nicole by my side, I find myself wondering if I can repaint that picture. Different hues, different brushstrokes, but still something hopeful and alive. My relationship with Nicole has deepened in ways I never expected. We've confronted my scars openly. She knows that certain songs bring back floods of memories, that I still get anxious whenever she's late coming home, my mind drifting to worst-case scenarios of betrayal. It's not fair to Nicole that I carry this baggage, but she's patient, and we talk it through. Communication is a lesson I've taken to heart after losing Haley. I don't want to be the man who's too wrapped up in his own assumptions to see the truth staring him in the face. At work, I've managed to climb the ladder more than I ever thought possible. Carl, my old boss, jokes that heartbreak turned me into a workaholic, channeling my restless energy into productivity. There might be some truth to that. My supervisors appreciate the dedication, though I'm trying to balance it better now that I'm learning to actually live, rather than just survive. I've earned a reputation as someone who pushes through adversity, and though they don't know the full story, they see a man who doesn't back down when challenges arise. One of the most surprising outcomes of this ordeal is my ability to empathize with others who faced similar heartbreak. I've had coworkers confide in me about their own relationship struggles. I've had friends of friends reach out, knowing part of my history, asking for advice. It's strange to be seen as a sort of veteran in the war of love and loss. But I appreciate these connections because they remind me that pain is universal, that we're all just trying to find our way through the labyrinth of human emotions. Sometimes, sharing a few words of comfort or a hard-won piece of wisdom can help someone feel a little less alone. There's also been a subtle shift in how I view trust. Before Haley's betrayal, I was naively open, automatically giving people the benefit of the doubt. When she left, I swung to the opposite extreme, skeptical, suspicious of everyone's motives. Now I've settled into a middle ground. I still believe in the goodness of people, but I'm also aware that anyone is capable of deception given the right circumstances. It's not cynicism, it's realism. Trust is a gift, and it should be earned and nurtured. But it shouldn't be withheld out of fear either. When I look back on the day Haley walked out of my life, I sometimes try to imagine an alternate universe where she simply sat me down and told me the truth. That she was unhappy, that she'd found someone else, that she wanted to leave. It would have hurt like hell, but at least I would have been spared the years of wondering if she was alive or dead. That if I had done something catastrophic to push her away. Yet, I know that alternative scenario exists only in my what-ifs. In reality, she chose to vanish, to hide her infidelity behind a veil of mystery. The reasons she gave me, her fear, her feeling of being trapped, don't fully justify her methods, but they offer a glimpse into the flawed human being she is, and I can accept that now. Acceptance is a strange beast. It doesn't mean I approve of what she did. It doesn't mean I don't sometimes feel a pang of rage or sadness when I recall certain memories. Acceptance means I acknowledge that it happened, that it shaped me, but that it doesn't have to dictate my future. It means I forgive her, in my own way, if only to unchain myself from her actions. People on Reddit often asked why I didn't just file a missing persons report or involve law enforcement. The truth is, by the time I had any inclination to do so, evidence showed she left of her own volition. The police saw it as a domestic matter, an adult choosing to disappear from a relationship. There was no crime. As for me, I couldn't blame them. Haley's family was just as clueless at the time, and any official search would have required far more substantial proof of foul play. I had none. Over time, I realized that even if I had tried to force the law to intervene, it wouldn't have changed the fundamental truth. Haley left because she wanted to. No legal measure could fix that heartbreak. Occasionally, I reflect on the love I once felt for Haley, the genuine moments that transcended the later betrayal. Those memories still hold some sweetness, even if they're tinged with bitterness now. I remember the nights we'd cook together in our tiny kitchen, dancing to old Motown records. I remember how she'd surprise me with thoughtful gifts that showed she'd paid attention to every offhand remark I made. I remember the times we drove to the countryside just to watch a meteor shower, wrapped in blankets and hope. Those moments remind me that what we had wasn't always a lie. Yes, she ultimately chose another path, but we had real love once. And I've learned that I can cherish the good times while recognizing the bad. It's a lesson that's been invaluable in my relationship with Nicole. Love can be wonderful and terrifying in equal measure. We're both aware that people change, that hearts can shift. But rather than letting that fear paralyze us, we use it as a reason to remain open, communicative, and honest. We don't dodge difficult conversations. We don't sweep red flags under the rug. We face them head-on because pretending everything is fine when it's not can lead to silent resentments and, ultimately, betrayal. I had a dream recently that threw me for a loop. In it, I was back in the Seattle neighborhood where I found Haley. Instead of her opening the door, though, I opened it to find myself standing inside an empty room. Dust motes floated through the air, illuminated by a single shaft of sunlight. No furniture, no pictures, just a bare space. At first, I felt panic rising in my chest. What did it mean that there was nothing there? But then a wave of calm washed over me. The emptiness was peaceful, a blank canvas. When I woke up, I found myself oddly comforted. Maybe it was a sign that I'd finally cleared out the clutter of unanswered questions, that I no longer needed to fill that space with anger or longing. It was empty, yes, but it was mine to reclaim. In the weeks that followed, I told Dr. Fletcher about that dream. She smiled in that knowing, gentle way of hers and said it sounded like a powerful subconscious metaphor. We discussed how sometimes the biggest step in healing is learning to be okay with not having all the answers, with letting the past remain in the past. That emptiness can be an invitation to start anew, to fill the space with healthier, more authentic parts of ourselves. I continue to write about my experiences, though not as obsessively as before. My journal isn't just about Haley anymore. It's about life's smaller moments, the jokes Nicole and I share, the milestones in my career, the evolving relationships with my family. I write about the random acts of kindness I encounter, the small victories and defeats of everyday living. Putting pen to paper or fingers to keyboard helps me stay grounded, to appreciate that each day is a fresh page. The old story ended, and a new one began. Sometimes I still get messages from strangers on Reddit who stumble across my posts. They ask if I ever got revenge, if I confronted Ryan, if I had Haley arrested for something or tried to destroy her new life. I tell them no, there was no revenge to be had, not in a literal sense. Real life isn't a Hollywood script, and I never wanted to stoop to destructive behavior. Finding her and hearing her explain herself was all I needed, even if what she said wasn't enough to patch the hole she left. Getting revenge might have felt satisfying in a twisted way, but it would have kept me chained to that anger. And I'd already lost too much time to the darkness. I've also been asked if I regret the 5-year search, if I wish I could go back and tell my past self to move on sooner. That question is complicated. On one hand, yes, I regret the nights I spent crying on my floor, the friendships that withered while I was consumed by obsession, the moments of joy I missed out on because my thoughts were constantly elsewhere. On the other hand, Those 5 years shaped who I am today. They taught me the depth of my resilience, the extent of my capacity to love, even in the face of betrayal. They showed me that while heartbreak can nearly break you, it can also reveal facets of your strength you never knew existed. Would I want to relive those 5 years? Absolutely not. But do I reject them as wasted time? Not entirely. Pain can be a ruthless teacher, but an effective one. I learned lessons about boundaries, communication, self-worth, and forgiveness that I might never have learned otherwise. I learned to take responsibility for my own happiness rather than pinning it solely on a partner. And now that I'm in a healthier place, I can offer empathy and guidance to those navigating similar storms. I'll admit there's a part of me that occasionally wonders how Haley is doing, if she's content with the life she built, if she ever thinks about me. It's a fleeting curiosity, usually drowned out by the busyness of daily life. If she's happy, then good for her. That means she found what she was looking for. If she's not, that's her journey to walk. I don't wish her misery or ill fortune because I refuse to carry that bitterness any longer. I'm sure she has her own regrets, her own guilt to bear. But that's between her and her conscience. The man I am today isn't defined by being left behind. He's defined by how he moved forward. And in moving forward, I found facets of life I might otherwise have overlooked. The sweetness of supportive friends, the beauty of vulnerability in love, the quiet power of self-reflection. My story no longer feels like a tragedy. It feels like a testament to human endurance. A heartbreak that once threatened to annihilate me became the crucible in which I forged a new sense of identity. As I near the end of this long reflection, I'm reminded of a quote from an anonymous internet post that once struck me as unbearably true. Healing doesn't mean the damage never existed. It means the damage no longer controls our lives. For a long time, Haley's betrayal dictated my every decision, my every waking thought. But today, it's simply a chapter in my past, a lengthy, painful chapter, yes, but one that led me here to a new horizon. My hope is that anyone reading this, whether you've experienced a similar betrayal or just stumbled across my story, will find solace in the knowledge that healing is possible. It won't look the same for everyone. For some, it might mean cutting all ties and never looking back. For others, it might mean facing the person who hurt you and demanding answers. And for some, it might mean going through a protracted period of searching, only to learn that the closure we seek often lies within ourselves, not in another person's explanations. However it unfolds, trust that there is life beyond heartbreak, that the future still holds wonders you can't yet imagine. Haley's absence once felt like a cosmic injustice, as though the universe had singled me out for punishment. But now I see it as one thread in the complex tapestry of my life. It changed the pattern, yes, but it didn't unravel the whole. And with each passing day, I weave in more threads. Threads of love, of friendship, of personal growth. The tapestry isn't perfect, and it never will be, but it's mine, and it's real, and it's enough. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Heartbreak doesn't have to define you forever. It can scar you, transform you, even break you down to your rawest essence. But with time, support, and perseverance, you can stand back up. You can build a life that isn't centered around what you lost, but around what you've yet to gain. And in that rebuilding, you may discover parts of yourself you never knew were missing. Thank you for walking with me through this saga. Thank you for letting me share these words, for allowing me to unburden my heart. Wherever you are, whatever you're facing, know that you are stronger than the worst day of your life. Pain can shape us, but it doesn't have to be our final shape. We keep growing, we keep learning, and we keep loving, even after the deepest cuts. I wish you well on your own journey, wherever it may lead, and hope that, like me, you'll find the strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time. In the months since I last sat down to detail my experiences, life has continued its steady march forward. Some nights, I still dream about Haley's face, but it's no longer the frantic chase that used to haunt me. Instead, she appears like a figure passing by in a crowd. Recognizable, but no longer the center of my universe. I take it as a sign that the worst of my anguish has finally settled. I've also grown closer to Nicole's family. They heard fragments of my past, enough to understand why I can be reserved at times. To my surprise, they embraced me without judgment, welcoming me to family events as though I'd always belonged. This acceptance was a balm for old wounds. I've spent holidays in their home, laughing at inside jokes I'm only just beginning to understand, and feeling the warmth of a family untainted by tragedy or betrayal. It reminds me that new connections can flourish even when old ones crumble. On a breezy autumn afternoon, Nicole and I took a walk by the river, the same place I used to roam when Haley and I first moved in together. The scenery felt both familiar and foreign. The leaves were turning vibrant shades of gold and crimson, and a gentle wind rippled across the water's surface. In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I realized I was no longer afraid of revisiting places tied to my memories of Haley. My memories might never vanish, but they no longer carried the same piercing sting. Standing there with Nicole, I felt a quiet gratitude for the second chance life had given me. I continue to write, though my journal entries now focus on the present and the future. Planning weekend trips with Nicole, considering whether we should adopt a rescue dog, reflecting on the progress I've made in therapy. Haley seldom occupies those pages, and when she does, it's often with a sense of detached compassion rather than burning regret or fury. It's strange how a love, once so central to my identity, can become just another story I tell about myself. Sometimes, people ask me if I believe love is worth the risk after everything I've been through. My answer is always yes. Love is inherently risky. There's no blueprint guaranteeing that two people will grow in the same direction, stay loyal, or remain happy together. But it's also one of the most transformative forces we have, capable of inspiring hope in the darkest places. If I had chosen to forsake love entirely after Haley, I'd have missed out on the warmth and healing Nicole brought into my life. My experience taught me to love more wisely, perhaps, but not to stop loving altogether. As for closure, I've come to see it as an evolving state rather than a single event. It's not merely the conversation I had with Haley on her porch in Seattle. It's every decision I make to prioritize my well-being, every moment I choose to let go of resentment, every step I take toward building a meaningful life for myself. Closure isn't stagnant, it's alive, shaped by how we continue to live after the fact. And with each passing day, I feel more certain that I've found the kind of closure that truly matters. This final note is my way of signing off on that painful chapter once and for all. I no longer feel the urge to update strangers on the internet about my progress, to seek validation or advice for something that has finally settled in my heart. I'm sure there will still be hard days. Healing doesn't erase memories, but it does soften their power to hurt us. And that, for me, is enough. Thank you for walking this road with me, for reading my words, for bearing witness to a story that could have broken me, but instead led me to understand my own resilience. Wherever you are, whatever heartbreak you carry, know that there is life and love beyond the shadows. All it takes is the courage to step forward, even when your heart feels too heavy to lift. Step by step, the burden lightens. Step by step, you find your way back to yourself.